So I see all these things and how they read the papers and they that's this can't be done as well. You know how hard it is.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
There we go. Very nice.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start in about 3 minutes. So if you want to grab another drink or food, now's the time. Last announcement, restrooms are right behind this wall if you need them.
These are live mics.
But apparently you don't deserve the mustard sitting right.
Right. You have to make. No, you must stay right here.
Okay, I'm going to begin. So, welcome, everybody. I'm Kathleen Merrigan. I'm the Executive Director of the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems at Arizona State. It's really great to see all of you. We thought we'd be in government shutdown today. And a few of our colleagues were thinking that too, and they weren't able to make it because now they actually have to go to the office and do some work. But we're really pleased that you could be here for what I hope to be a very interesting conversation. I'm going to begin by introducing Dr. Peter Schlosser, who runs the Arizona State University Global Futures Laboratory, to give us some opening remarks, and then we'll proceed with our program. We will have questions, time for Q&A at the end. I'm not going to do it after each speaker. So take out a pen, write your questions in your new little notebook. Thank you, Astrid and the German Embassy, for our treats at the table. And we'll look forward to hearing your input too on what the most critical questions are facing agriculture today. Dr. Peter Schlosser, I'm not going to give a bio because we had hyperlinks to all of their bios in the invitation, but just so you know, he's vice president and vice provost, VP twice, VP squared, I don't know what that means, but also a member of the German National Academy of Sciences. So he's based in Tempe, Arizona, but he's wearing his German credentials today. Come on up, Peter. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kathleen, and welcome to all of you. I think we also can say Guten Tag. I just was reminded that Guten Tag works at every time of the day, although there are other ways to address morning and evening, etc. And a warm welcome to today's event, which is called Future of Global Agriculture in an Era of Multiple Crises. And multiple crises we really experience. So the event is a conversation that might inform the next US Farm Bill. And the main idea behind the event really is to elevate the most important issues in global agriculture today. And in this spirit, today's distinguished panelists and speakers will identify what they believe to be the most critical issues we are facing in 23 today. I believe there is hope that the outcome of the discussion might lead to some sort of a document that could have a title along the lines of the 10 most important questions in agriculture today. That's what I gather from the notes. And to me, that sounds like a wonderful outcome if that can be accomplished. Today also marks the anniversary of the German-American Friendship Day. And I learned from Kathleen that this is just by accident. There was no planning behind that, but it's a great coincidence anyway. And then I learned, of course, I got curious about that. And I learned that on this day in 1683, the first significant group of German immigrants arrived in the New World. So that's a nice framing of this get-together. Before getting a bit into content remarks, I would like to thank Councillor Astrid Jacobs de Padua and TMG Director Alexander Müller for co-hosting this event and for being in a collaboration with the Sweetie Center. I also would like to thank my colleague and friend Kathleen, who already introduced herself as the director of the Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems, an important center in the Global Futures Laboratory, because we wouldn't be here if we wouldn't think that food is one of the most critical issues of we have to deal with in our world today. And by the way, talking about the Sweetie Center, Alexander also is a fellow of the Sweetie Center, I learned. So there are many connections. So looking at that topic and ASU, you might ask, why is ASU deeply engaged in questions related to the future of food? And of course, that is, as many of you know, but some of you might not know, has its roots in a long-standing interest of ASU in sustainability and more generally, the future of our world. And that goes back to 2002 when our president, Michael Crow, who is now in his 21st year of leading the institution, arrived at ASU, and he brought with him that strong interest of using academia's insights and capability to think about what does it mean to move into the future. The Global Futures Laboratory of ASU then is dedicated to understanding the present state of the world we live in, with all its pressure points, but more importantly, to envision a future world in which the coming generations can thrive on a healthy planet, rather than being preoccupied with addressing all the problems that we leave behind for them. So food security then is one of the most critical issues in this complex set of questions that we are addressing. So to achieve these ambitious goals, ASU has embarked on creating a new university, a new type of university that is dedicated to use-inspired research with direct impact on the critical questions of society that society needs to answer. The success of such a new approach to academia's role in society is reflected in ASU's ranking in innovation. We have been ranked for 9 years in a row now. September 17 was the 9th year. #1 in the US for for innovation, and also the ranking in impact. Since the Times Higher Education started the impact ranking, which are modeled actually after the Sustainable Development Goal 4 years ago, ASU is ranked #1 in the US and among the top 10 in the world. So we are dedicated to these topics. We are also dedicated to inclusion and excellence. We often call it inclusive excellence. We have more than 150,000 students who seek degrees in person and through digital delivery of content. As I mentioned, Global Futures Lab is the central entity within ASU to address all issues related to sustainability and the future of our planet. De facto, it is a university within the university and designed to find pathways into a future that's characterized by offering options for action in a world of opportunity rather than sacrifice. Because we often, when we are confronted with making different choices, think of anything that we are doing differently than what we are used to will be a sacrifice rather than looking at the opportunities. And I expect that in today's discussions, these opportunities will be one of the focal points that will be addressed. GFL is a very young institution, was established in 2019, built on the School of Sustainability and the Global Institute of Sustainability, which have a longer history, 2004, 2006, still very young compared to the foundation of the university where I got my degrees from, which was in 1386, University of Heidelberg. So when we are talking about young or old academic institutions in the US, we always have to calibrate it against the European culture of academia. The GFL comprises more than 30 research centers. It has a whole college within it with 4 schools, among them the School of Sustainability, a solution space, and an engagement space. And in this engagement space, we are seeking dialogues like this one. We want to see what the outside world thinks and what it needs and how we actually can position ourselves to be a productive member of society. It has more than 100 core faculty and more than 800 global future scientists and scholars. So as we are moving into the discussion about critical issues facing agriculture, I would like to briefly comment on just a few aspects that are related directly to this question. Overall, we are living in a world that increasingly shows the stress that an increasing population is placing on all its systems, including food system and agriculture system. That depends, or that is caused by the fact that we're using too many resources, including energy, which actually is the reason that we have a climate problem. We are overusing limited resources such as water. We are practicing unsustainable land use practices and a food system that cannot be sustained in the future. And all these issues are linked, and in essence, they are all caused by the decisions humankind has made in the past years and centuries, frequently without a strategy that would consider side effects that these decisions would bring with them. And then as a consequence, we are now experiencing more extremes. Everybody can see them, can feel them in many domains, including rising temperatures. That's what a lot of people focus on, but that might be not the thing that bites us first. We have to pay attention to that, but this is because we are on a trajectory right now of 2.5 Celsius warming rather than the 1.5, which was the target of the Paris Accord. We blew right through that. So now we have to figure out how can we actually bend that curve at a level that is still manageable. But we're also seeing heat waves, droughts, floods, shifts of vegetation zones, seasonal cycles. And we are also, in addition to that, then coming back to the food system, we're also wasting too much food, and we are producing and consuming food in a way that's not sustainable. Climate change, as I said, is not the only culprit that puts pressure on agriculture. There are also societal elements such as conflict. The war between Russia and Ukraine was highlighted as one of those, the impact on the grain market. But there are many other instabilities around the world that have impact on agriculture and the food systems. I am sure that some of these, if not most of these aspects, will come up during the event in much more depth by those of you who are much more qualified to talk to the specifics of food systems and agriculture than I am, with my background originally in physics, moving through disciplines along the way. So with that in mind, I would like to conclude my remarks. I'm really looking forward to what I'm convinced will be a most stimulating round of presentations and discussions. And I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that welcome and opening thoughts, Peter. We appreciate that. And hello to everybody on the live stream. Thanks for joining us. It's, we've said already, German American Friendship Day. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you one of my friends and one of the sponsors of this program today. And her name has already been mentioned, Astrid Jacobs de, he said it so nice because you're German, Padua. It was okay? It was okay. So Astrid's been in town for a long time. We know her. She represents the German embassy. She does a lot of interesting work in food and agriculture, and we would love to hear from her thoughts. Come on up, friend.
Thank you very much, Professor Peter Schlosser, Kathleen, everybody here in the room and on the screen. Probably you expected the ambassador, but as you heard, unannounced or very short noticely announced, our president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, will be in town today, or he's already in town, and he's meeting with President Biden, and so the ambassador obviously has some other appointments. So it's my honor and pleasure to participate in this event today, trying to tackle the difficult questions of getting enough healthy food for all on the table. Now, I have been asked to focus on the need to come together to address this tremendous challenge. But however, first I would like to thank the Arizona State University team, in particular Professor Schlosser, Kathleen, and Dr. Suzanne Palmieri, for hosting us on this splendid rooftop for their hard work in facilitating today's event. Let me also thank Mr. Alexander Muller, while we go back some time already, not only for his support of today's event, but also for his tireless efforts in working on true cost accounting for food and farming sectors. Thus, I would like to acknowledge the close and fruitful cooperation between ASU, TMG, and the German Embassy's Food and Agriculture team. Sebastian is here as well today. So we want to explore what are the questions we have to really deep dive into to ensure food security worldwide. Let me start from the German perspective. Germany and the US are true powerhouses in agriculture and food production. Germany, especially a strong processor, relying on the import of sustainable produced commodities. Actually, by the way, tomorrow Anuga will be opened. That's one of the biggest show for foods in the world in Cologne. So in the past decades, trade disputes dominated the EU-US relationship in agriculture. However, more recently, we have found agreement. We need to join forces in combating hunger and food insecurity, as we and more countries are facing mounting crises and conflicts. The cooperation platform on agriculture of the EU Commission and the US Department of Agriculture is a strong testimony to this effort. Already before the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was not on track to achieving sustainable development goal number 2, the zero hunger one, you all know so well. Coming out of the pandemic, we have fallen even further behind. Hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition, something which sometimes is a little bit overlooked, are increasingly on the rise again. Russia's unjustified war against Ukraine and its cancellation of the Black Sea Grain Initiative have exacerbated these risks for food security worldwide. In the face of these immediate challenges, we cannot afford to put the supposedly long-term one, climate change, on hold. From devastating wildfires to deadly storms and floods, each continent has experienced extreme weather events of an unprecedented scale and extent. So the German government has put climate diplomacy at the core of its work. Moreover, in its national security strategy, Germany defines the concept of security broadly, extending to the need to safeguard life, freedom, and livelihoods. Something which is actually relatively obvious and we should all do. And I think the US is really a lead in that. We all know climate change threatens geopolitical stability, energy security, and reliable supply chains. Farmers, both in Germany and the US, are well aware of the changing climate. They feel the consequences of climate change, be it extreme weather events, heat waves, droughts, causing loss of crops, livestock, and income. Actually, there are so many colleagues from the agricultural attaché community, and we just came back from Oregon. And I mean, we talked to the farmers and we all found out that most problems are those which our farmers face as well. And one of the very highlighted one by everybody is workforce and the changing conditions in climate, and which then also have the effect on workforce needs. Also, the US-German Forum on the Future of Agriculture, which is organized by the Aspen Institute Berlin and the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, brought together 16 farmers from Germany and the US and other key agricultural stakeholders from research and business in Eastern Germany and the Corn Belt. So that was really interesting because the Eastern Germany is the part where we have bigger farms and the Corn Belt. So, I mean, it's still a different scale, but it's somehow comparable. So they had the opportunity during online workshops and an in-person meeting to develop concrete policy recommendations for the national level and transatlantic relations. So also the question, how can we define where we need change the most urgently? So the farmers also highlighted that they all, on both sides of the Atlantic, face similar challenges. And there were especially 3 areas. So how to improve the resilience of agriculture to climate change, harnessing the power of agriculture to mitigate climate change and protect natural resources, and balancing the social, economic, and environmental sustainability of agriculture, and especially of the rural regions. But how do we get there? It very quickly became clear that one-sided policy approaches focusing on regulation in Europe and predominantly incentives in the US would not do enough, nor here nor there. Participants concluded a well-balanced mixture of sticks and carrots will be necessary to achieve changes in agricultural practices. Sticks as guardrails and carrots to support farmers in making the necessary investments. So this is an excellent example of deepening our mutual understanding, identifying sticking points and developing recommendations with concrete outcomes. We will share those from this dialogue with Berlin, and we also will share them with USDA, because each side needs to do its homework. The EU developed the Green Deal and its implementation in the agricultural sector through the Farm to Fork strategy. Important legislative pieces of the package are still outstanding, and there are a lot of discussions going on. Well, in the US, the new Farm Bill, hopefully to be negotiated soon, and hopefully Farm Bill 23 will be a milestone in sustainable US agriculture. We all know agriculture, nutrition, and food security are supposed to play a bigger role on the multilateral level. Germany and the US are actively committed to ambitious climate goals and to the reduction of global greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, we must counter the effects of the climate crisis. Mitigation and adaptation must go hand in hand. So let us join forces to identify the truly relevant questions for policymakers now and for COP28, so we can agree on a roadmap to keeping the 1.5 degrees, even though it will be very hard, limit within reach. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
So Astrid, just to make you feel like you're not left out, your president's going to be here. We have our photographer, Scott. It was like having the paparazzi, wasn't it? All those photographs he was taking of you. It's great. All right, I'm going to have my panel come on up here. And so again, I'm not doing bios because you had the hyperlinks. And you also had a hyperlink to a very interesting paper that was published in 2010, which was 100 critical questions. And maybe I have the real name, but of course I left that piece of paper on the table. But that's a lot of those questions are still unanswered, unaddressed issues. So I'm sure we'll hear some of that in this panel. I'm hoping that we also unearth some new questions and do some pruning, because when you give people 100 questions, sometimes it becomes a blur. It's like that elevator speech. What are the 3 things you need to tell your boss? Those kind of strategies is something that we need to think about. So I'm going to introduce in order of their speaking. We're going to start with Alexander Mueller. who is a senior fellow at the Sweetie Center, but the founder and managing director of TMG Think Tank for Sustainability in Berlin. Previously my boss's boss's boss. And he came in from Germany specifically for this program, so we're very grateful. And then to Alexander's right, we have Ahmed Ahmedin. I'm really bad with names. You can correct me when you get your chance. This is his he came for this program, first visit to the United States, let alone Washington, DC. So I think we really are honored by his presence to do all of that travel to be here and to really give us some glimpses of the world from his vantage point, and it's not going to be pretty. There's some tough things out there. And then I'll speak. Then next will be Dr. Ricardo Salvador, also a senior fellow at the Sweetie Center, but at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And he's been very busy organizing a lot of different groups to raise their voices in this current Farm Bill debate. Astrid, you're very optimistic, also a diplomat though. 2023, we'll see, but we're still calling it the forthcoming Farm Bill. So over to you, Alexander, to begin.
Thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me with this little tiny microphone. Peter, thanks for welcoming us. But Kathleen, thanks a lot for inviting us to your birthday party today. So happy birthday, all the best for you, good health, and continue with your strong energy. Peter, you raised the question, why are we dealing with food? Let me say it very frank. There are two topics beyond war and peace. Unfortunately, this has popped up again, that are of utmost importance for the future of mankind. It's energy and food. People very often consider energy as complex. And of course, it is huge investments, a lot of technology. But if you compare it to food, energy is simple. You only have to go somehow carbon neutral. That's it. The rest is technology and investment, and you get there. If you talk about food, it's a lot more complex. It's not one food system. You don't have an equivalent of going CO2 neutral in food. It's much more complex, and it has the potential to become a solution. That's why I think in 2006, Jules Briddy had asked 50 or 55 people to work with him on an article, the top 100 questions of importance for the future of agriculture. I'm not going to read them all, but you can raise the questions in a similar way today, after they have been published in 2010. So what I'm going to do now is to present briefly what are the main outcomes of this article. And I would like to raise the question, what is different today? And I think a lot of things are different. And the framing of such an article would be completely different, much more challenging if we would try to start a similar exercise today. So in 2008 or 7, I was tasked with coordinating the input of FAO to this article, which was a challenge in its own. And I tried to ensure that natural resources had to play an important role. At this time, water and land was somehow a given, and you do not really have to discuss a lot about it. My old colleague and friend Ruben Echeverria at this time was heading the Secretariat of the Scientific Council of the CGIAR, and they did a lot of efforts to tell people you cannot take water and genetic resources for granted, you have to manage them. And therefore, within the article, there have been 4 areas where the article was focusing on. And the article was looking at natural resource input, it was still called input, agronomic practices, agricultural development, and markets and consumption. And after a long discussion, there were key messages in this article, and I'm going to present them briefly. So the task of agriculture, discussed in 2010, was to meet the expected demand for food, first item, without significant increases in prices. Second, to produce 70 to 100% more food. And then a nice addition in light of the growing impacts of climate change, concerns over energy security and regional dietary shifts. And by the way, we need to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. Today, we would phrase it completely different, and I will come back to it. The article also made a strong call that the goal of this article and the goal of a process to be set up is to no longer simply to maximize productivity, but to optimize across a far more complex landscape of production, rural development, environment, social justice, and food consumption outcomes. However, this global dialogue has never been started. One of the many articles where a lot of knowledge had been put together, a debate should have started, but the science policy interface did not really work. And therefore, I think we can learn the lessons that just having a good scientific basis and deciding what should be done is not sufficient. You have to set up the process. I would call it in a transdisciplinary way, where you bring all available knowledge together in order to decide how to do it, and not only to request it should be done. And therefore, the dialogues that have been proposed did never take place. Efforts to prioritize research and draw up directed programs of research did not happen at an appropriate level, and to guide policymakers, which is difficult, I'm coming from politics, to guide policymakers in funding organizations to support appropriate research programs also has not happened. So one could say, let's do it again, let's try it again. I think this would be wrong, because the environment in which we are operating has completely changed. And I'm happy that my colleague and friend Ahmed is here, because he's representing a region where all the problems you can imagine are coming together. All the problems, and they have to deal with it. And many of the problems related to agriculture have to be discussed differently. So what needs to be discussed differently? First of all, I think it's now consensus that talking about agriculture is not sufficient. We are talking about food systems. If we take this seriously, this has far-reaching consequences, because it's easy to say, oh, we have to apply system thinking, but doing it is very difficult, and it requires, again, global collaboration to identify what does it mean. Second, there's a new term on the horizon where, if I would have mentioned it in FAO 2005, let's transform food systems, they would have kicked me out, because it was maximize something, be more efficient. But now it's about transforming food systems. And there's a whole debate about what, by the way, does it mean to transform food systems? My old organization had hosted the World Food Summit Stocktake, and they did a lot of things, but they did not even start to discuss what means transformation. Is there a direction of transformation? What does it mean for national transformation pathways? And therefore, if we talk about the future of agriculture, it's a systems approach, and it's about transformation. But that's not enough. We also have to look at what are externalities influencing food systems. Climate change. I don't believe that we are going to achieve the 1.5 degrees target. Everything we know is that we will go beyond. And what we have seen this summer in Europe, here, the wildfires, is an indication that things are changing. So my proposal is that if we talk about food system transformation, we have to apply risk management. Not say it will somehow work and we do our best. No, we have to do a stress test for all our proposals, and we have to think about what can we learn from my friend, because he is dealing with the consequences already. What he is observing, what he's suffering today will be maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow our reality. So stress test, climate change. I was looking in preparation of this meeting into a report published 2004 by the National Intelligence Council. The guys from the Secret Service, looking at climate change. And they came up with a clear answer. Climate change is a multiplier of already existing risks. So wherever we have a problem today, the problem will be bigger, different, more challenging. And I would like to add, it also creates new and additional challenges. Therefore, stress test is the key thing. Second, I would like to introduce the 4 Cs: climate, conflict, costs, and COVID. So climate is clear, but can we really capture what is the forecast? Conflict. The war in Ukraine had for a short period of time interrupted free trade. And then the international community decided, I don't want to criticize it, fertilizers and agricultural commodities they are outside the sanctions against Russia, because we knew what is going to happen if they would have been included. But now let's consider, Kathleen, whatever is happening, we might have 2 bad harvests in Brazil or maybe in the US, and countries decide, my country first, and free trade will be interrupted. Since 1990, we are always preaching, keep the trade open, for good reasons. And availability of food is linked to international trade. But what is happening if trade will be interrupted? I see Wei Zhang from IFPRI here, and we were talking about the situation in China. China, 1990, has imported 0 tons of soybeans. In 2022, around 100 million tons. Food security in China depends a lot on import of soybeans and pigs, and the number of pigs increased from 400 million to 750 million. And therefore, what is happening if Brazil or the US are not producing enough soybeans? We will come into a new situation of competition where the old solution, keep the trade open, is not going to work. And therefore, conflicts, geopolitical situations have to be considered. Costs, we all know, coming back after 2 years to the US, I can say your food has become very expensive here. And people who earn less than I do, they suffer a lot. And therefore the costs of food have gone up, but this is not all. We are talking about the true cost accounting. What is the real cost of our food? What are the externalities? And true cost accounting doesn't mean to invent costs. It's only analyzing already existing costs. Because if you go to a supermarket, we pay 4 times. 1 wallet, we pay in the supermarket, cheap food. With the second wallet, we pay for environmental degradation. The third wallet is our health bill when we do not are in a good shape. And number 4 is destroying social relations in rural areas. So therefore, cheap food very often is very, very expensive. And I can only ask us to apply true cost accounting when we are looking at the future of food, because this is a way to not ignore the real costs, but to integrate them into planning. Pricing is a different story I don't want to talk about. And COVID is the last thing. We have learned in COVID that local production, local value chains have been interrupted, and COVID is not over. And good friends of mine working in a high-level laboratory on new and novel zoonotic diseases, they are always telling me COVID might only have been a test. If we have a serious other pandemic outbreak, HPA H5N1, high pathogenic avian influenza N5N1, human-to-human transmission, then it looks completely different. Therefore, my last sentence is, the critical questions to agriculture more or less remain the same to the article. However, the environment has changed. And this means that our approach to answer this question also has to completely change. And I can only hope that your farm bill, maybe the European Common Agricultural Policy, that we open up for this debate. Changing $1 in the farm bill is difficult, and moving €1 in the European agricultural policy is also difficult. But let's open up our thinking. Let us create a platform where we can exchange what do we know about the future, where do we see problems. Let's apply risk management, because if we don't do it, we cannot harvest the opportunities which are also in the agriculture sector. That's what I wanted to say to your birthday, Kathleen. Happy birthday.
Get moving, Marigan, do something. That's great. You're next, but I didn't say anything about your organization. If you can tell, I don't know if everybody knows about your organization, so if you could just give a little snippet before you talk about the critical questions, that would be great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And yes, I'm Ahmed. My organization is an intergovernmental body of 8 member states in the Horn of Africa. It's called IGAD. It's basically like your EU and others. So this is a body that brings together 8 member states in the Horn of Africa. I think let me start by thanking the organizers, especially the University of Arizona, as well as Professor Kathleen, the Executive Director of the Swiss Center. Colleagues, this is a bit of a different perspective. I'm going to take you to the Horn of Africa, which I want you actually to appreciate what food systems and how we see food system resilience from that point, from that perspective, let's say from the global south. If I just start from, looking at the last 4 or 5 years, you'd be amazed how we are reeling from floods to droughts, to pests, and then to COVID and so on. In 2019, all of our member states, 7 of them or 8 of them, have reported that they have been affected by floods. So that was an El Nino condition for them. Almost 8 million people have been affected and reported of 2 million people displaced from their place of origin. Immediately that was followed in 2020 to a consecutive drought season. 5 consecutive drought seasons. This is a new normal, particularly for that part of the world. You can imagine 1 failed season, 2, 3, but this is 5. So a multi-year flood, a multi-year drought, particularly puts food insecurity at the maximum level. So between 2016 to 2020, there is a double number, which was in 2016, it was about 23 million people have been food insecure, IPC 3 and above. It only takes 4 years for this number to double. So this is the real situations that we are talking about. So I think the distinguished speakers have mentioned COVID, of course, which is a game changer. It's a lived experience for all of us, but most importantly, climate extremes. So reeling, particularly for communities that whose mainstay is traditional pastoralism, subsistence farming, and so on, this is a lot. Particularly, this is beyond their coping capacities. So this is what puts the number today at 55 million people are reported to have been food insecure. The most vulnerable communities, in fact, many of whom have to deal with fragility also, conflict, very protracted conflict, vested interest, Horn of Africa, I think we all know. So they have to thrive within this protracted conflict and also compounding risks. So I was mentioning floods, COVID, desert locust, and which is a perpetual, actually, resource-based conflicts within the communities. Talking of food insecurity, the number actually of people who are food insecure is increasing. The trend is basically high over the last 5 years. The paradox is the funding available for humanitarian response is declining. So from 3.7 billion in 2016 to 2.4 billion in 2020. Obviously, there is donor fatigue because everyone understands that we are moving in circles. Droughts, humanitarian emergency, floods, humanitarian emergency, COVID, humanitarian emergency. So this is not sustainable. Everyone realizes. So, but the question is, I think today I'm here to bring this perspective of what can we do about it. I'm happy to be, it's an honor to be honest, to sit with great brains, great institution, to ask what it takes in African context to transform food systems with totally different understanding of what it means for, let's say, for the North, okay? If you divide South and North, it's purely different. The whole issue about food systems, food security is about access for that part of the world. I know for the North, it's more of quality. Access and quality. So that is, I think, quite important to consider when we think of whether we call it food system resilience or food system transformation. I would like to also bring the perspective of understanding food systems in a more holistic approach is the way forward. Food is not just food. There are a number of things, including, of course, production, productivity of agriculture, socioeconomics, culture. Culture is also very important for that part of the world. For example, Somalia have the longest coast, rich fish resources, but culturally fish is not appreciated. So I think that dimension is also quite important. Most importantly, the environmental factor. So for communities, like 70 or 80% are staying on traditional pastoralism, subsistence farming. The issue of the environment, the ecosystem is quite central, which often case is degraded beyond, sometimes beyond restoration in some areas. They are degraded badly because that area experienced over 4 million years of agriculture since some of the countries are proud of, I think, that history, which is good, but I think the land is degraded in an unimaginable way. So sustainable food systems are particularly important for Africa, for the southern hemisphere, not just because we are talking of a massive transformation, but to keep people alive. This is, I think, quite central, and this is a different perspective, actually, I would like to bring in from this point of view. So what it takes is actually collaborations and partnerships. As IGAD, as intergovernmental body, what we promote is actually bringing in more fresh perspective, bringing on research, innovations, to see what we can transform. Particularly pastoralism, for example, many people ask, will it survive the future climate, for example? At current climate is fine, but future climate. Can people still survive with 5 consecutive failed seasons? Can they? Because their diet on their food comes from the milk, camel, cows, and goats. If there is no rain, then there is no pasture. Then it was very quick, actually. It just takes 1 season, 1 failed season for people to be displaced. So that is, I think, the sensitive things that I would like to highlight. One key aspect, and the current debate is actually now, in light of these complex challenges in the Horn of Africa or entire Africa, the real issue is now what it takes now to transform that sort of scenario. Number one is actually the current debate on global financial system, access to finance. A research, for example, from a London-based think tank, just released, I think it's last year, mentioned that countries like in the Horn of Africa, in a fragile setting, the access to climate finance is at maximum of 10%. The rest is in between. So if you take that to local communities, the number is far below. If you take it to indigenous people, they are saying 1 or 2% of the global finance, call it the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and so on. That is, I think, a critical gap. We aspire to have a collective, financial systems, which is brilliant, but it's not reaching those people which I'm talking about. So as IGAD also, we realize that moving in this circle of humanitarian crisis and emergency is not the way forward. Everybody knows, even the donor fatigue can tell a lot. The real issue is now, can we transition to anticipation rather than waiting until the disaster strikes and trying to manage the risks? Can we anticipate? As IGAD, that's what we are, pushing for. Can countries, from whatever little they have, can they put aside resources to act based on a forecast, based on exceedance of a threshold? That is more dignified, colleagues, that's more sustainable, and that's also much cheaper. They said early warnings are like, in terms of return investment, they are 10% or 10-folds much cheaper than dealing with a crisis. In conclusion, I think I would like to highlight some 3 most important pillars, particularly to put food systems or to make food system more resilient in the African context, at least particularly for the Horn of African context. Number 1 is ecosystem conservation and restoration. I think the basis of food production in that part of the world is the ecosystem. You degrade the ecosystem, it is very clear what will happen next. The second one is also promoting investment and access to finance. Colleagues, I really encourage you to read that Spark research. The finance is not reaching the local communities. Local communities are far. Even finance institutions like mine, ICPA, the IGAD Climate Prediction Application Center in African context. So I think that is quite important to understand. If global solidarity or global financial systems are there, then it must work, or it should have to work for communities which are in the frontier lands of climate change. This is, I think, a lived experience for most people. That's why we are having 55 million people food insecure as we speak now. So just in October, November, December, we were in 5 failed drought season. Now we are bracing for floods, El Nino effects. Today, I'm reading a report of already people being displaced in Somalia and so on. So I think this is intense, colleagues. This is intense, particularly for countries who are, all of them are lower income countries, particularly their capacity to provide support. Let alone recovery and construction is quite limited. The third most important aspect which I would like to bring in food system resilience in the African context is resilient supply chain and markets. I think colleagues have talked about what Ukraine war did to that region. So it was immense, colleagues. It was immense. And I think that value chain at a local level, regional, continental, and global level is quite important, which also has to do with risk governance systems in the countries. As I conclude, I think I would like to put a challenge for all of us within this framework. For example, I'm happy that Arizona State University star #1 for the last 9 years. I would like to put the challenge to all of us. How can we contribute? How can we bring in ideas to try to transform food systems in such a complex, protracted systems like in Africa? I think I'll stop you there and thank you very much, Dr. Kathleen.
Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and I want to start out by asking for an indulgence for about 1 minute. It will seem like I'm not addressing the topic. That is because I want to tell you that I came to the United States in 1970 as a 13-year-old, and there were many important things happening globally in that year. In the United States, it was the year of the Apollo 13 crisis that you may at least have read about. It was the year of the thalidomide episode. It was the year of the Kent State shootings. But as a 13-year-old, let me tell you what I was interested in. Bob Dylan had gone rock and roll. And his backing band had also gone out on its own, and they just called themselves the band. The leader of that band was Robbie Robertson, and Robbie Robertson just passed away in August, at the beginning of August. But I was listening to that music at that time, and I remember a line from a song that was called "It's Just Another Whistle Stop." And the context of today's event, what are the big questions about agriculture? We'll get into instances, but I think an umbrella question for me that covers all of the instances, the specificity, comes from this song, "Just Another Whistle Stop," which was a very memorable line to me for many reasons. And it goes, people, people, where will we go before we believe in what we know? So the reason why that's applicable to what we're discussing here today is that from the standpoint of someone at the Union of Concerned Scientists, we know what we need to do about all of the different crises that we've heard enumerated here today. The scientific knowledge is not limiting. The political science is clear. The economics is clear. The sociology is clear. We know what the deficiencies in governance are that we need to address that will permit us to apply the science, the knowledge from economics, the knowledge from political science, and so on. So what we need to focus on is what the obstacles are. I have an answer to that. The obstacle is that there are organizations, primarily corporations, that are more powerful than governments, that can dictate to governments, and they have an interest in the trajectory of many of the vectors that we've talked about today. Now, I don't want you to hear that as an anti-corporate screed. I actually believe there's a very important role for corporations. I wouldn't have a place to sit on, and I'd be sitting here naked if I didn't believe in the utility of corporations and the important role that they play in modernity. But I do want to point out that they're the obstacle that prevent us from acting on what we know. So let me get specific. So as we understand the system that our prior speakers have described to us, it is a backward system. It is behind on the science. It is behind on its intention, on its objectives. And I want to give you actual examples. When this version of agriculture began, and I'm going to point at a very specific date, 1860. We don't have time here to give you all the reasons why I point to that particular date. At that period of time, we thought we were farming God's green earth. We did not understand the way that the planet worked. We didn't understand animal metabolism. We didn't understand photosynthesis. We didn't understand what today we would call atmospheric science. Therefore, we had little chance of understanding how our interventions in the world would affect the way that the planet works. We now understand that the way that the planet works is that there are a series of biogeophysical cycles that are all mutually interdependent, and that our life is dependent on the functioning of those interacting cycles. but we intervene in those cycles in a noxious way that we have found to be profitable, and we are resistant to changing our behavior. So for instance, the system of agriculture that we all believe is modern, I would clarify, is a system that has applied modern technology, yes, to 18th century objectives. And those 18th century objectives are to extract at minimal to zero cost, to concentrate resources in a staging area where we can profit from the concentration of manufacturing, the concentration of those resources, and not to pay for the pollution that is the result of that economic activity. We now know and can name all of those things and can even quantify many of them, but have not updated economic or political systems to actually tax polluters or to charge polluters for the damage that they're doing or for the public health damage that Mr. Muller and Dr. Merrigan are experts on from the work that they've done on true cost accounting. So rather than cite those facts as interesting trivia, the question is, why don't we actually change policies in order to acknowledge that the government in the role of serving the public interest, and actually corporations subordinate in their power to the government, which creates the environment in which we all live and interact and exchange, should act on the authority to actually change our norms, our behaviors, and our practices. So that to me is the scenario that we're operating in. A consequence of what I'm claiming here is that the so-called problems of agriculture cannot be solved within agriculture. They are problems of economics, there are problems of politics, there are problems of governance. There are technical things that we need to address in agriculture. There are different practices, different behaviors, different systems that need to be instituted. But the reason we all knock our heads against the wall when we go about that work is that that's not where the limitations are. The limitations are in the grander world that set the rules about what is profitable, what is permissible, what is incentivized. So let me give you some more concrete examples of how the present system is backward and how also we need to untangle some myths about the agricultural system. We all believe it's modern because it's highly mechanized, specialized. These days, it's highly technified. These days, large aspects of the system are driven by computers far from the place where the staging area is. There are actually machinery now that is driven by satellites that are orbiting the planet. There's lots of blinking lights involved, and we confuse that with modernity when the intent is this archaic intent that I've already described. We should not confuse the technology with the intent, with what we're actually achieving. One of my favorite definitions of technology is that it's knowledge applied in such a way that we don't have to understand it in order to use it. So yes, we have very modern technology that helps us excavate mineral nutrients much more efficiently than in the 18th century. We have modern technology that helps us extract fossil fuels much more efficiently than in the 1860s, and so on. You get the idea. That should not be confused with the modernity that we actually need, which is to assure that in the 21st century, the food system generates not only food, but health and well-being for everyone involved, from production all the way to consumption of what that system generates. We're not there, we're far from that. And so that's the example that I want to dwell on. Let me ask you to think about the following here. You have heard, perhaps even believe the narrative about how urgent it is that we stoke productivity because population is growing and what are we going to do? And you've even heard august academics estimate by what proportion we need to increase productivity. Let me argue that we actually need to decrease production, agricultural production. I know you'll feel sorry for me, but let me tell you the basis of my argument. Everybody in this room knows that the footprint of the agricultural system is greater, and not only greater, but vastly greater than the footprint of the food system. The food system is teeny tiny compared to the agricultural system. And that is made possible by the acceleration of technological power that now has made it possible that farmers that formerly in the 18th century did produce the food, now are primarily producing commodities for industrial purposes. So globally, this figure will change depending what country we're talking about. Globally, about 30% of cropland goes to food that we directly consume. I'm mentioning this because that means that there is a lot of agricultural land that can be repurposed. And yes, I'm talking about land reform on many different dimensions. What we do with the land, who owns the land, and who is going to benefit from the use of that land. mindful that governments have played a role in appropriating land and redistributing it. So that liberates a great deal of land so that we don't pretend any longer that we can keep the extant climate warming system in place and sprinkle some cover crops among it in some clever way and somehow generate a climate friendly system. And so that extra land can be put into genuine carbon sequestration, not only in standing vegetation, but in organic matter in the soil. That is one of the ways in which agriculture can make a potent contribution to mitigating its current contribution to greenhouse gases. Remember the commodity production that I described, and here's where I need to clarify what I meant when I said, don't interpret me as being anti-corporate. If governments are going to take a role in supporting farmers who are producing food for the purposes of food and nutritional security, that is a political objective that I think we can all agree on. But it is an artifact of the way that agriculture has industrialized over the 200 years that we believe that we need to continue to support the agricultural sector, which is producing non-food products. They are free to continue to engage in those activities. Sure, produce the biofuels, sure, produce the feed for livestock, continue doing all of that. I don't see why governments need to support that. They should be in the market doing that sort of thing. And that will rationalize the price of the land, that will change their calculus about what they're producing and how much they're producing and how much they're willing to invest to produce that, will change the calculus of what inputs they're using, how much they're motivated to regenerate, and so on. It allows the market to work more accurately than the distorted system that we have in place right now. So I hope that that clarifies what might otherwise be interpreted as an anti-corporate creed in terms of the proper role that we all ought to be playing to have a more credible system in the sense that it actually manifests what we know both about the way that the planet works, what agriculture actually is, and what the role of the public sector should be in regulating and judging the effectiveness of that agricultural system as long as we're supporting it. The markets currently cannot work. Agriculture is a textbook system, particularly in industrial countries, of market breakdown, market chaos, actually. And let me give you the best example that I know of. As you know, the theory of the market is that in an environment where buyers and sellers have the same access to information and are free to make decisions in their self-interest, buyers and sellers will compete and in that competition generate the best outcomes for everybody involved. That's the theory of the market, chapter 1, agricultural economics. There's massive breakdown in the food system. That principle does not operate in the food system. Mr. Muller just gave us a brilliant example of that we're all familiar with. It is the example that all of us consume what this food system now generates. And that food system in general is making us sick and it is decreasing our lifespans. We can quantify it over the 20 years that have just passed. Globally, disability adjusted life years have decreased by 7%. Countering the 20th century advancement, which was increasing lifespan, primarily due to the conquest of infectious diseases, but it's still a reversal of that trend. Now our food system is making us sick, and we understand that because the cause of those premature deaths is metabolic disease. 46% of the population globally suffers from metabolic disease, and that figure is growing exponentially. We know the cause of it. The cause of it is that the items that the food industry finds the most profitable to sell are the ones that make us sick. In the modern environment where we don't generate our food and the choices that we have are what the food system provides us, you know that the food environment that they create for us is the one that is most profitable for them in terms of placement, promotion, pricing, and so on. And so the result is the scenario that I've just described. The sicker we all get, the more profit they make. That's the market breakdown. I'm not just claiming that. I've given you the statistics about what's happening with DALYs, disability adjusted life years. Since the beginning of this century, the profits of the food sector have grown linearly. They're currently around, using round figures, the revenues are about at about 6 trillion. They're projected to be about 13 trillion in 5 years. We don't have the direct access to profit figures, but we know that the margin in the industry goes from 2 to 10%. Take the midpoint, 6%, 2% if you're running a restaurant, 10% if you're manufacturing the stuff. If you take it at 6%, here's an industry where profits are growing at a level of hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and we're all making sick, we're all getting sick, And there is no market mechanism that sends any signal to govern that. And that's a role for public governance, to make the connection about what is actually being sold. If something makes you live longer, or lives less, if something is poisoning you, reducing the quality of your life, that is a poison. The single biggest component of what the food industry manufactures, they call confections and snacks, junk food, the biggest profit center that they have. So I want to elaborate that. I think I make my case. There's a role there for more effective public governance, and it's not served by the famous iron triangle of political science that you know well. If you have sufficient economic power, you translate that into political power, you put in place the decision makers that are going to satisfy the decisions that you want to see in place. They do not surprise you. They make the decisions that favor your business model. You make your profit from your business model. You plow that profit back into placing those decision makers into government. So when are we going to do something about that, since we know exactly what it is? Again, chapter 1 of political science. What you do is institute political systems where qualified politicians are put into place because of the fact that they don't have to depend for their position on being financed by folks that have a conflict of interest. So as a public, we can invest in funds that can actually put people that are competent for the role that they are supposedly discharging. I want to give you an insight into that. It just happened 2 days ago. Our office is 1 block away from here. I make it a point. Those of you in this town know that the folks that keep the buildings clean for us are primarily from El Salvador. They're refugees. I make it a point to speak with Juan, who's the custodian on my floor. So I ran into Juan, and Juan was talking about the political circus that he's been observing in this town. He said, I left my country because this was happening there, and I thought this didn't happen in advanced countries. And he said, you know what I've observed? I don't need to repeat to you what we've seen here in this past week, but he said, you know, I think that the test for my qualifications to be the custodian in this building was a more complicated test than the people that are in Congress right now. The custodian in my building can see that. So there's a question that needs to be solved before we can get on to the more technical, direct issues that we've all described here, and which we could get into in any degree of detail that you want. But I don't see that being the limiting factors I mentioned earlier. One last comment that I'll make for you is that we understand the way that the planet works, not in totality. I don't want to misrepresent that we know everything that we need to know, and we have a lot more to learn, but we know enough to do better than what we're doing right now. So with that, I'll leave it for discussion, and we can get into any details that we need to get into.
Okay, well, that's a lot. Before I come up with my little list, I kept myself to just 10 little things, and the question that Alexander posed, what's changed? I do want to say, after hearing from Ahmed, and because I now live in Arizona, the home of Sidney McCain, who's running the World Food Program, I just want to say, since we're from a lot of different countries in this room, the world's in crisis around food, and hopefully governments around the globe will do what's necessary to help the people that you're describing. Very, very painful situations. All right, so what has changed? I looked at that article in 2010, and there are a lot of really great questions, as I said at the top of the program, that we have yet to address. But what has changed? And I have my list. The one thing that's constant, though, between that article and where we are today is the need for more investment in research. Alexander mentioned this. I've been in this town for most of my adult life. My first job here was being the research person on the Senate Agriculture Committee. And I have heard everyone in every farm bill cycle talk about we need to do more for research. People do the sign-on letters. They do the speeches on the floor. But then when it's really time for the bill to be written, for the dollars to be allocated, the money's not there. And when I look at that list of questions from 2010, and we could add so many more today, I don't know how we do it without a really significant investment in research. And so I just have to call that out. I'm sick of the talking points. We've really got to do the job. What's really different for me from 2010 to now is this recognition about next gen leadership, what we need. And that's just not next gen producers, our farmers, our ranchers, our processors. It's next gen people in the halls of Congress, in the halls of USDA. There's just not enough people who say food and agriculture, that's my thing, that's my career. And we need to invest in a greater way to have that pipeline of truly the best and the brightest coming into this field. And I think there are a lot of mechanisms in the context of a farm bill that could contribute to that. I better put my, and Astrid, you had mentioned in your remarks, workforce as something that's really on your mind when you think of the critical questions. See, it helps if I put my glasses on, I can see my notes. Everyone everywhere is talking about regenerative agriculture. And I ask every person who raises that, like, how do you define regenerative? Now, some of you may know part of my history is having written the law that established the National Organic Program. And then I also was in a position at USDA where I oversaw the rulemaking. And maybe that's too many rules and too much definition for some people, but it has teeth, it has clarity. And right now we're investing a lot of money, government money, taxpayer money in regenerative agriculture. And I just don't know what it is. There are a lot of different moving parts. And it's a big question on my mind. I want to have continuous improvement. A lot of the regenerative craze has come out of deep interest in soil health, which is long overdue. So that's all great. But until we pin down and build consensus around a definition, I worry that we will be using precious dollars in ways that won't have the impact that people hope it will have. That's an issue for a farm bill. We could define regenerative. Equity. So I looked across those 100 questions and there's nothing really about equity. And you can't talk about anything today without recognizing the importance of equity. I always tell my students, you know, we think of sustainability as the three-legged stool: equity, economics, environment. And I say, there's a forgotten E, and oftentimes in our policy making and even in our discussions, the three-legged stool is wobbly because we don't put enough time and attention to equity. If you go to the Sweetie Center website today, you'll see our featured report is a great report done by two of our grad students. It's called Operationalizing Equity. And they looked at a couple of IRA, Inflation Reduction Act funded programs at USDA that are trying to help state departments of agriculture do more in terms of outreach to socially disadvantaged producers. There's a lot that we need to do, have to do. In Arizona, where I now live, 59% of our producers are Native American. And oh, wow, people are surprised because you think of Yuma and all those vast vegetable fields, and we call it the winter salad bowl for the country. But there are a lot of people who are very small scale, Native, oftentimes in reservation land, without a lot of support. And it's past time for us to address the inequities in food and agriculture, and a farm bill can do that. So I like to think about farm-driven cuisine and how we can do the inverse of where we're at, where consumer demand sort of reaches back, and that's how we grow and produce and process and create, design food. What if everything stemmed from the farm? What can be sustainably produced? You know, meat. You know, how much meat should we be producing that's, you know, in a sustainable volume? I'm so hip on pulses. I love pulses, but we don't have the best markets for pulses. We talk about the importance of rotations and cropping systems, but, you know, we're not just talking, you know, corn bean rotation. We're talking about, in some cases, very complex rotations that go across maybe a dozen years. But for farmers to do that, they not only need the carrots that Astrid was talking about, but they also need the markets. if you don't have those markets, it's just not going to happen. So how do we have investments through a farm bill that bring about farm-driven cuisine, maybe even working with our best and brightest chefs and bringing the culinary world together with the food system thinking and the work of our food and agriculture leaders. Number 6, nature-based solutions. So I really was interested in that 2010 article. I think if I did a word count, biodiversity would probably be one of the top words that came out because it was across many recommendations. I still don't think we do much around biodiversity. We talk about it. A farm bill could do a lot more about that. It could also do a lot more in terms of investing in biological controls, natural kinds of farming, organic farming, using nature, working alongside nature to do what needs to be done. I think that is something that we really underinvest in, and we do the same old things. I was in New York City this past week, and I was driving out to the Hudson Valley, and you could hardly see your hand in front of you because everything was covered in smoke from the Canadian wildfires because we do monocropping of trees now. I mean, it's just insanity that we do these things and that we don't change. 7, food as medicine. So in the previous farm bill, we started to dip our toes in this, thinking about veggie prescription program, thinking about working with the medical world and having people be prescribed fruits and vegetables because we know how critically under-consumed fruits and vegetables are in this country and really around the world. And we know how important they are to health. How do we go from that small little program to food as medicine, where we're really thinking in big ways, where if you're receiving Medicare, Medicaid, it's my birthday, see how I'm thinking now? I'm not there yet, I shouldn't say that. Medicare or your, how do we work with health insurers? So really having the right diets until the statistics that Ricardo talked about, that they become easy to do and accessible to all. Food as medicine, I think, is a hot topic, and the Farm Bill could do some creative things around that. 8. So this goes to what several colleagues have said here about feeding the world. And I think that I don't need to add on. We just have to really think about that question again. We don't need 70% more food. When I think of, I have this sort of equation in my mind. If we invest in women who are the globe's farmers, not so much in this country, but around the globe, and give them access to land tenure and education and training equal to men, that would be a huge boost, according to Jocelyn's organization, FAO, and the World Bank. You add to that dealing with food waste, you deal with corruption in government, you look to do things in a more equitable way, and you throw in less meat, I think the problem's over. So I'm not really focused on the question as it's been framed in the past. I think we need to have a lot more nuances. Number 9, and this came up a little bit. I don't know how many of you have looked at the Bloomberg maps. It's how America uses its land. And if you haven't looked at those maps, you just Google, you'll find it. They're really stunning. And I show them to my students because it really, in a fairly abstract way, but the integrity of what they're doing is very good. It gives you a sense how much of the land that, as Ricardo was saying, how much of the land that we have in this country is being used essentially for livestock feed or biofuels. When you look at how much fruits and vegetables, it's like teeny weeny. I would love to figure out a way that we remap where we grow food. And that's not an easy thing to do. And it needs government assistance. You can't ask farmers to change what they're producing and overnight. And I could convince Peter Schlosser to grow this on his farm, but it's not a solo act. It really needs to be a collaborative, cooperative remapping. Some of that remapping, by the way, is happening anyhow because of climate change. I've got colleagues up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks who are quite excited and doing interesting research because they have new opportunities to grow food in ways they've never had before. I mean, some of that remapping is happening. It's one of the impacts of climate change. So let's sort of step back and figure out a process, a stakeholder process where we really can design for the world as it really exists today. And then finally, because Alexander wouldn't be my friend any longer if I didn't follow on and mention true cost accounting. So this is something that he and I work on quite a bit. It's a priority of the Sweetie Center. We really don't want to make food more expensive. It's really out of reach for so many people, but we do want to hold policymakers and decision makers in the private sector accountable for the decisions they make. So by providing that transparency, what are these externalities, both positive and negative? What did they really cost? So when I pick up that blueberry muffin, or I look at that orange that's going to be in my orange juice, what is its true cost? That will help us find pathways forward. And I think that's very important. And that's also something that can be addressed by the Farm Bill. People are very stuck in their heads about what a Farm Bill is. I find this, I go to meetings of people who've been in town for a while and they're like, you know, there are, I don't even know what the number is. There's 12 titles in the Farm Bill. I'm like, is that some sort of religious statement? I mean, my first Farm Bill, and I think I'm 7 Farm Bills old at this point. That's a different kind of birthday when they come, for those of us in town. But my first Farm Bill was the 1990 Farm Bill. Chuck, you might remember, but I think it was something like 23, 24 titles. It was a whopper. So there's no magic number. There's the only things that are really the bumper guards are the committee jurisdictions, but it is pressing upon policymakers. And for those of us here in this room and around the country who care about this, it's pressing upon us to say, sticking with the same program is not going to work in today's world. We have to do something different. The Farm Bill is a huge investment. It controls about 70% of what USDA does. Farm to fork, cap, huge things in where Germany is and where many of you are from. We've got to do it different. It can't be cookie cutter anymore. So with that, I'm going to close the panel, and then it's time for Q&A. And I think we have moving mics. Is that true, Suzanne? Are we going to?
No,
We don't.
Here.
Oh, we're going to, taking up the ceiling. Okay.
If you're talking, try to lift your head.
Okay. And Peter's he's going to make the serious decisions about who has a question to ask, and you can get in the queue. Or if you want, offer up your own question. What do you think should be on the list of the most critical questions facing agriculture today?
Okay, thank you to the panel and Kathleen. So a lot of food for thought, a lot of food for questions. Floor is open.
And I realize it's close to time. Actually, I just looked at my watch. I overtalked. But anyhow, Suzanne says, yep. So let's take 3 questions, maybe. Go
Question
ahead.
number 1.
Can I start? Or
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like Kathleen, I've worked at USDA, and you can hear from my accent, I'm from North America, so I'm familiar with US system, but I represent the Food and Agriculture Organization. I'm interested in this point around how the government policies need to change so that the use of land goes for food. If I'm understanding the point correctly, the use of land goes for food and not for other industrialized purposes. But I just quickly looked up the government subsidies. Now, again, this is global subsidies, I mean, for all commodities. And so not necessarily just for soybeans, but globally USD for US farmers, the subsidies accounted for 8.8% of their income and was $23 billion. So that sounds like a lot, but 8.8% income. So I'm struggling with if the government if USDA just wiped out its subsidies, yes, the markets would change, but it's still only 9% of farm income. So the numbers are not supporting your point about that.
Yeah, so this is the case where that famous statement of Disraeli would come in, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And so let me tell you about that particular statistic. There's a distribution to those subsidies. They don't go to farmers. The majority of farmers don't get a subsidy. They're concentrated in the upper 11% of farmers, and they actually happen to be the farmers who least need support because they can make all their income from farming. But present policies make it so that they count on the federal government as part of their business model. So that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I'm familiar that they only go to, having worked in USDA for 23 years, I'm familiar that they only go to 7 commodities. But again, it just, I recognize that there's a lot of other farmers out there, but I think that one, blaming the farmer for the market disruption is folly. And two, again, I just don't, it's less than 9%, even if 9% is going to 100 farmers total, including, if they even do thousands and thousands of acres, it does not seem like it is the silver bullet that we need here to change the system.
On that last point, I completely agree with you. I'm not claiming a silver bullet, and actually, let me just take a look at the time here. So to try to deal with it as streamlined as I can, one test of what you're raising is just simply to run it past the folks in the industry, what they think about the scenario of completely eliminating subsidies. And you will get the response about what they think, how important those are. The dollar amount, there's a lot that I'm going to elide over here. The dollar amount is not so important as the fact that the subsidies signify that no matter what happens, market downturn, natural disaster, the full faith and trust of the federal government is going to make them whole. That means it creates this moral hazard situation. There's no incentive for them to change anything. They know that they have that particular backing, no matter what it is that they do. And that particular sector, I should emphasize, not talking about farmers, the folks that I called out are the corporate sector. And by and large, farmers in this country are not corporate. That group that I talked about had a corporate structure, but they tend to be family-owned farms in the United States. So the important thing here to draw out is that class of farmer that you're talking about there has more common interests with the industry than it does with the majority of farmers. They're a very different type of individual than I think is typically conjured in public relations. And it serves the interest of agribusiness for us to believe that we're talking about the family farm in the phenomena that I just described. They're completely different things. So just to draw on one stereotype, the typical Midwestern farm couple, can't make their living off of agriculture, so they both work off the farm. That's how they get access to medical insurance, all that sort of stuff. However, the type of farmer that we're both just referring to, that top percent there, they're the folks that would think of 10 to 12,000 acre extensions as the bare minimum for them to be able to operate. We have a direct line to their representative in Congress, who, when they want to work on generating more demand for what they produce, have a private plane that they can use to get to DC to join a delegation that's going to go to China to promote what they're selling. Totally different class of individual. So it's really important, this is the sociology of the situation, not to conflate a homogeneous population when you conjure up this idea of the agribusiness sector, a totally different thing, a large industrial farmer, and the majority of farmers. Each require different kinds of support and different kinds of understanding.
Okay,
I think
looks
we
like
only
this
do
might
one.
need some more follow-up beyond the meeting. There was another question over here.
Ruben.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank Arizona for lunch, a great conversation. I also wanted to say that I'm listening much more carefully to Alexander now that when I used to report to him.
That's really true.
So I just want to pick up on, and don't worry, it won't be long. Just a couple of things that were mentioned there. One is on the huge underinvestment on public global agricultural research. As you said, we all talk about it. I've been saying this for only 40, 50 years. And then the investment it continues to grow. I mean, the talk goes up, but the investments are not there. Today, China invests twice as much as the US on agricultural research. And then 50 countries, including some of those that you mentioned, are below 0.5% of ag GDP. So the underinvestment is huge to address those questions. I really like what Alexander was saying about the archaeology, what happened, and you were referring to the 10 points. If you look at the system, at the Sustainable Development Goals, back to the questions, the risk factor, that's a fantastic thing forward for researchers perhaps in the room, and to look at about goals, they all trying to be flying solo, and there is the trade-off related to your risk. And the final one is, I think, on the science policy, interface, not too much effort, it was mentioned, of course, not too much effort there. So perhaps looking forward, a bit more work on that science policy interface with all of these facts will help a lot. Thank you.
Any other questions? We are actually already at time. So let's take one more question here. Michael.
Thank you very much. It has been a really fascinating conversation. So thank you very much for that. And also, it's really challenging for the gentlemen. I'm really sorry for that name. The Union for Concerned Scientists. It really depicted a Manchurian candidate type of scenario here in Washington. That may be true or not, but it's not for me. But I will take it for granted. But what I find really interesting, honestly, I don't know whether the family is going to cover that or not, is what I might mention, a holistic approach that really needed to tolerate in current circumstances. And I'm the counselor of the European Union Embassy, so for the health food department of agriculture as well. What we've been trying to do with the European Union is to have a holistic approach that follows the production of food from A to Z. Astrid mentioned the Green Deal, I mentioned the farm policy that follow the entire food system. So that's the family as the option to approach the food system holistically. And what could we do and how could we help in make it so that a holistic approach is encased embodied into the next family. In European Union, we thought that we need to follow all the different steps of the food production chain. I mean, we look at fertilizer, we look at pesticides, we look at antimicrobials, we look at animal welfare, down to food labeling and nutritional labeling included. And of course, we got our challenges in the European Union, but the main challenge comes from our trading partners who try to stop our approach at every single step of the way, and also looking to our Australian and Canadian friends in it. But that is actually the case. The majority of the issue we have in WTO these days concern pesticides and antimicrobials. And we do try to do our best in order to approach the challenges imposed on the food system by climate change. And yet the rest of the world does not seem to be following. So what could we do in terms of a more holistic approach, both in the family and also in our own case?
And that was more a comment and an addition to the discussion than a direct question, the way I interpret it. Given the fact that I get signals that we are at or beyond time, I would like to thank everybody who enabled that workshop, who helped organize it, participated here online, and I'm sure the discussions will continue beyond this event today. And with that, I think we have reached the point where it's time to close this event. Thank you, everybody.